Hey guys, tonight we are heading to the wild, windswept coast of medieval Scotland. Imagine a land of misty lochs and heather-covered moors, where ancient stone castles stand guard against the relentless North Sea winds. We'll meet a Scottish laird who is far more interested in the dusty contents of his library than in clan feuds or cattle raids. This is a story about how very different people find common ground, not on a battlefield, but in the quiet, meticulous pages of a long-forgotten book. It's worth remembering that for all its rugged romance, life in a medieval Scottish keep was mostly just cold, damp, and smelled vaguely of sheep. You probably wouldn't survive the sheer, bone-deep boredom of a single winter, let alone the questionable hygiene. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a quiet and simple way to support the channel. And if you feel like it, post your location and what time it is where you are. It's always nice to see where everyone is drifting off from. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind has a voice here. It's a low, mournful moan as it scours the granite cliffs, a sharp, angry shriek as it tears at the slate roof of Blackwood Keep, which is the default state of the sky in this part of the world, comes in sideways, finding its way through the arrow slits and ill-fitting window frames, making the tapestries on the stone walls permanently damp to the touch. The entire castle feels like it is slowly surrendering to the elements, a tired old man of a building, hunkering down for a long, miserable night. And in the heart of this drafty, crumbling fortress is its new master, Alistair MacLeod, the Laird of Blackwood. He is not a man who matches his surroundings. The title of Laird conjures images of a giant, bearded warrior, a man with thighs like oak trees and a laugh that can curdle milk. Alistair is not that. He is tall, but in a lean, slightly stooped way, as if he is constantly trying to make himself a smaller target for the world's inconveniences. His dark hair is perpetually untidy, and his hands, which should be calloused from gripping a broadsword, are instead stained with ink. He became the Laird 6 months ago, after his older, much larger, and infinitely more warlike brother managed to fall off his horse into a ravine. Alistair is still not entirely sure it wasn't an act of malicious protest on the horse's part. He is currently standing in the one room that should be his sanctuary, the library. But it is not a sanctuary, it is a disaster. It is a room overflowing with the accumulated, disorganized junk of 3 generations of MacLeods who were far more interested in hitting things than in reading things. A mainstream historical fact is that a laird's responsibilities went far beyond warfare. He was the chief judge, landlord, and administrator for his entire clan. He was expected to settle disputes, manage crops, and ensure his people were fed through the long, lean winters. Alistair's father and brother had managed these tasks through a combination of loud shouting and intimidation. However, is a man who prefers quiet contemplation, and he feels the weight of these duties like a physical cloak of lead. The library is his inheritance, and he hates it. Not the idea of it, but the reality. Historians still argue whether the Scottish nobility of this era were largely literate, or if they relied on trained clerks and priests to handle written matters. The state of this room suggests Alistair's ancestors fell firmly into the latter camp. Books and scrolls are not neatly arranged on shelves. They are crammed into massive, iron-bound wooden chests, known as arks. This was a common way to store precious manuscripts, protecting them from damp and fire, but here it has resulted in a chaotic jumble. Leather bindings have gone green with mold, vellum scrolls are fused together by moisture, and the entire room smells like a mixture of old paper, decaying leather, and mouse droppings. It's less a library and more a literary tomb. He lifts the heavy lid of one of the arks. Inside is a chaotic pile of documents, land charters, marriage contracts whose ink has faded to a ghostly brown, and a frankly alarming number of angry letters from a neighboring clan concerning a stolen flock of sheep, a dispute that apparently raged for a full decade. A quirky tidbit of medieval life is that vellum, the treated animal skin used for most important documents, was incredibly durable but also susceptible to humidity, which could cause it to warp and buckle. A fact Alistair is discovering firsthand as he looks at a charter that has curled into the shape of a dead leaf. He sighs, a sound that is immediately swallowed by the vast, cold silence of the room. He is a scholar trapped in a warrior's life, a man who wants to organize knowledge but has inherited only chaos. He has a duty to his clan, a responsibility to be their leader, their protector. But all he feels is the crushing weight of this disorganized past and the relentless, dampening presence of the future. He lets the heavy lid of the ark fall shut with a dull, final thud. He is the Laird of Blackwood. And he is utterly, completely, and miserably overwhelmed. While the new Laird is drowning in the dusty chaos of his inheritance, your world is one of order, purpose, and the rich, complex scent of the earth. Your home is a small, turf-roof cottage nestled just below the looming grey walls of the keep, close enough to the village to be of service, but far enough away to afford you a measure of peace. The wind that shrieks at the castle's ramparts is, down here, just a persistent, sighing whisper that rustles the bundles of herbs hanging from your rafters. Your world is not defined by stone and slate, but by the living, breathing rhythm of the seasons. You are Elspeth, and you are the village healer. This is a title you did not choose, but inherited, like the color of your eyes or the small cottage itself. Your mother was the healer before you, and her mother before her, a long and broken line of women who learned to read the secret language of the land. While the laird has his books of law and lineage, your library is the moor, the forest, and the sea-swept cliffs. Every leaf, every root, every blossom is a word, a sentence, a cure. Your hands, unlike a laird's, are not stained with ink. They are stained with the green of crushed nettle, the yellow of dandelion pollen, and the dark, rich brown of dug earth. Your morning is a quiet ritual of work. An old woman named Morag has just left, her rattling cough soothed by a syrup of honey and her hound you simmered over the peat fire. You are now carefully grinding dried willow bark in a heavy stone mortar, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump a steady heartbeat in the quiet of your home. A mainstream historical fact is that willow bark contains salicin, which the body converts into salicylic acid, the active ingredient in modern aspirin. For centuries, it was a go-to remedy for aches, pains, and fevers, a piece of practical magic that actually worked. As you work, you listen to the village sounds drifting up the path, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the bleating of a lost lamb, the sharp cry of a gull. You know the rhythm of this place, the health of it, as surely as you know your own pulse. And lately, the rhythm has been off. There is an anxiety humming just beneath the surface, a low-grade fever of uncertainty. It is all because of the new laird. Like everyone else, have taken his measure from a distance. And you are not impressed. His brother was a man you understood. He was loud, often drunk, and prone to violence, but he was a known quantity. He was a laird who was present. He rode through the village, he settled disputes with a roar, he led the hunting parties. He was a force of nature, like the wind or the tide. This new one, Alistair, is a ghost. He has been seen only a handful of times since his arrival, a fleeting, dark-clad figure disappearing behind the castle gates. The village gossip, a force more potent than any herbal remedy, says he spends all his days locked away with his books. In between her coughing fits, had been full of it. He hasn't even inspected the fishing nets, she grasped, her eyes wide with disapproval. And the stores of salted fish for the winter, who knows if they're sufficient, his brother would have counted every barrel himself. You share her exasperation. A laird who does not understand the practicalities of survival is a danger to you all. What good are books when the winter storms come howling down from the north, and the stores are empty? Historians still argue whether the concept of the ivory tower intellectual was a reality in the medieval period, or if even the most scholarly of lords were, by necessity, deeply engaged in the practical management of their estates. From your vantage point in the village, Alistair seems to be a man determined to prove the theory. You finish grinding the willow bark into a fine, pale powder and carefully tip it into a small linen pouch. A quirky tidbit of folk medicine was the use of amulets, and a pouch of willow bark worn around the neck was sometimes thought to ward off evil spirits, in addition to its more practical uses. You set the pouch aside for the old fisherman who was due to come by later, his joints always aching from the damp sea air. Your gaze drifts up towards the keep, a dark, brooding shape against the grey sky. You imagine the bookish laird in his cold stone room, his nose buried in a dusty scroll, utterly oblivious to the world outside his walls. He is a man who reads about the world instead of living in it. Who live by the feel of the soil and the taste of the rain, find the very idea of him deeply, profoundly irritating. Days pass, and your irritation with a reclusive laird settles into a low, simmering resentment, a pot left to bubble forgotten at the back of the hearth. Up in the keep, Alistair remains oblivious to the village's collective sigh of disapproval. He has, after a period of profound and paralyzing despair, decided on a course of action. He cannot be his brother, nor his father, he cannot rule by charisma or by the sword. But he can rule as himself, he can bring order to chaos. And the chaos, he decides, begins in this library. He will conquer his inheritance one dusty wooden chest at a time. It is a slow, methodical, and deeply unglamorous campaign, but it is one for which he is uniquely suited. He starts with the smallest of the arcs, a chest bound in rusted iron straps that looks as if it hasn't been opened since the last king of that name sat on the throne. The hinges groan in protest, releasing a cloud of dust so thick he can taste it, a dry, peppery flavor of ages. It is exactly as he feared, a tangled mess of household accounts. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval estates, even remote ones like this, kept surprisingly detailed records. He unrolls a long scroll detailing the exact number of salted eels consumed by the household during the winter of 1427. He finds another listing payments to a man for thatching a barn roof, and another detailing the purchase of a new pot for the kitchens. It is the mundane, grinding paperwork of lordship, and it fills him with a deep, soul-crushing weariness. He moves to the next chest, and the next, his ink-stained fingers becoming coated in a thick layer of grey dust. More of the same. Legal disputes over fishing rights, inventories of armor, most of it described as rusty. In the bottom of a large, worm-eaten oak chest, his fingers brush against something different. It is not a stiff, crackling scroll of vellum, nor the smooth leather of a professionally bound book of law. It is thick, heavy, and yielding, bound in rough, hairy deerskin and tied shut with a leather thong that has gone stiff with age. It is enormous, far too large to be a book of psalms or a personal diary. It feels more like a collection of stone tablets than a book. The first genuine emotion he has felt in weeks that wasn't some shade of despair stirs within him. He heaves the object out of the chest and onto a large, scarred wooden table. Dust billows from its surface. He works the stiff leather thong loose, the knob crumbling in his fingers. He opens the cover. The pages within are not fine vellum, but a thick, rough, almost cloth-like paper, and they are filled, edge to edge, with a spidery, chaotic scrawl. And drawings. Hundreds of them. They are crude, almost childish sketches of plants, flowers, roots, leaves, and fungi rendered in faded brown ink, some with clumsy daubs of color. It is a herbal, a handmade, deeply personal encyclopedia of the local flora. On the first page, and a slightly larger, more deliberate script, are the words, a catalogue of all herbs, weeds, and mosses of Blackwood lands, compiled by my own hand, Alastair MacLeod. This year of our Lord 1402. His great-grandfather, a man known in the family legends only as Alastair the Quiet, a laird who, like him, was said to have preferred books to battles. Alastair feels a sudden, profound connection to this long-dead ancestor. This was not a document of lower commerce. This was a work of passion. He turns the thick, heavy pages with a reverence he has not felt for any other object in this room. The tradition of the herbal is an ancient one, stretching back to classical scholars like Dioscorides, whose De Materia Medica was the foundational text of Western botany and pharmacology for over 1,500 years. This book, however, is no slavish copy of an ancient text. This is a record of a specific place, a love letter to the stubborn, resilient plants that clung to this patch of Scottish rock. He stops on a page featuring a lumpy, unidentifiable fungus, sketched with particular vigor. The quirky tidbit scrawled beside it reads, "The puffy spore bale, found near the old falls. When pressed, it gives a foul smoke. Do not press it near your wife." Alastair allows himself a small, dry smile. This is not just science, it is a life, recorded in notes and scribbles. Historians still argue whether these kinds of personal projects were intended as practical manuals for medicine and foraging, or if they were more a philosophical exercise. A gentleman's hobby of cataloging God's creation. Looking at this book, a chaotic jumble of folklore, practical advice, and personal asides, it seems to be all of those things at once. A flicker of purpose, a genuine excitement, ignites in Alastair's chest. This is it. This is a project. He could restore this manuscript. He could organize it, transcribe the near illegible notes, perhaps even improve the illustrations. He could bring his ancestors' work back to life. It is a task that connects his scholarly inclinations with the very land he is now bound to rule. He feels, for the first time, like he might have a place here after all. But as he tries to decipher a passage about the uses of thistle root, the excitement begins to cool, replaced by a familiar frustration. The handwriting is atrocious, a series of drunken spiders that have fallen into an inkpot and crawled across the page. It's filled with local Gaelic names and folk terms he has never encountered in his Latin texts. He can read the entry for Carduus, the thistle, but he has no idea what a clumsy man's curse is, or why it's good for a toothache. The book is a treasure map, but it is written in a language he only half understands. He needs a translator. He needs a local expert. He needs someone who knows the land not from a book, but from the earth itself. Your opinion of the Laird, which is already hovering somewhere between suspicion and outright disdain, is about to take a sharp downward turn. The catalyst is not a matter of state, not a question of empty grain stores or neglected defenses. It is a splinter. A tiny, insignificant sliver of wood that has managed to lodge itself in the Laird's thumb as he was heaving the lid off yet another dusty ark. It is, by any measure, a pathetic injury. It is a nuisance, not a wound. But to Alastair, a man unaccustomed to even the mildest of physical discomforts, it is a source of immense and escalating irritation. And so, he is forced to do the one thing he has been actively avoiding for months: interact with the village. He cannot, of course, lower himself to visit your cottage. That would be a breach of unspoken but rigidly enforced class divide. He sends a boy, a young stable hen named Tam, to summon you to the keep. The summons, when it arrives, is delivered with the breathless and slightly terrified air of a messenger who has just come from the presence of a mysterious and unpredictable monarch. The Laird, he's hurt his hand. Tam stammers, his eyes wide. He requests your presence. At once. You pack a small leather roll containing your tools of the trade, a fine-pointed pair of bronze tweezers, a small, sharp blade for lancing boils, and a pot of soothing calendula soothe. As you make the climb up the winding path to the castle, your annoyance battles with your professional duty. A laird who cannot manage a splinter is hardly a laird at all. You imagine his brother, who once set his own broken leg while roaring drunk on whiskey, and you can't help but make a comparison. You are ushered into the keep by a grim-faced man-at-arms who looks as though he would be far more comfortable repelling a Viking raid than escorting a village healer. He leads you not to the Great Hall, but to the library, a room you have never been in. The sight that greets you is somehow both exactly what you expected and yet still surprising. The room is vast, cold, and smells of decay. And in the middle of it all stands the Laird, looking less like a nobleman and more like a flustered librarian who has lost a particularly important book. He is holding his thumb up to the weak light from a high window, a look of intense concentration on his face. "You are the healer?" he asks, his voice soft, almost hesitant. It is not the booming command you would expect. "I am," you say, your tone clipped and professional. "I was told you had an injury." He extends his hand, a flicker of something that might be embarrassment in his eyes. "It is a minor thing," he says, as if trying to convince himself. "A splinter." You take his hand. It is, as you suspected, an ink-stained, scholarly hand, the skin soft and uncalloused. And there, embedded in the fleshy part of his thumb, is the minuscule wooden offender. A mainstream historical fact is that in an age before antibiotics, even a tiny wound could become a death sentence. An infection, or septicemia, was a constant and terrifying threat. And a good healer knew that cleanliness and the swift removal of foreign objects were paramount. You take a clean linen cloth from your bag, dip it in a small bowl of water that sits on the table, and gently clean the area. With a practiced, steady hand, you take your tweezers and, in a single, deft movement, pluck the splinter out. It is over in a second. He flinches, more from surprise than from pain. You then apply a small dab of your calendula soothe, a bright orange balm known for its antiseptic properties. A quirky tidbit of herbalism is that calendula, or pot marigold, was also called Summer's Bride and was believed to have magical properties related to seeing fairies. You are less interested in fairies and more in its proven ability to prevent festering. You say, releasing his hand, "Keep it clean, it will be fine." You begin to pack your roll, your task completed, ready to return to your own, more sensible world, he says, and there is a different tone in his voice now. It is no longer hesitant. It is the voice of a man who has made a decision. He gestures to the enormous, deerskin-bound book on the table. "Can you read?" The question is blunt, almost insulting, but you nod. "I can." "Not just the Bible. And you read the land. Do you know the Gaelic names for the plants, the folk names?" You look at him, your curiosity piqued despite your irritation. "I do." He opens the herball and points to a particularly chaotic page. "My great-grandfather compiled this. It is a catalogue of every plant on Blackwood land. But I cannot fully understand it. The names, the notes, they are a mystery to me. I need someone to help me translate it, to bring order to it." He looks at you, his gaze direct, and for the first time, you see not a weak, bookish recluse, but a man with a purpose, a strange, dusty, and deeply impractical purpose, but a purpose nonetheless. "I will pay you for your time," he says. "I need your knowledge." Historians still argue about the precise social standing of village healers. They were respected for their skills but also often feared. Existing in a limber space between the natural and the supernatural, for a laird to not just summon one for a wound, but to offer one paid, scholarly employment, was a profound and shocking breach of that unspoken social order. You look from the laird's earnest, ink-stained face to the wild, chaotic beauty of the book. It is a ridiculous proposition. And you find yourself, to your own profound surprise, wanting to say yes. You agree. The word leaves your mouth before you have fully considered the consequences, a small boat pushed out into an unknown sea. The Laird, Alistair, looks momentarily surprised, as if he had fully expected you to refuse. A flicker of relief crosses his features, quickly masked by a return to his usual scholarly reserve. An arrangement is made. You will come to the keep for 2 hours every afternoon, for which you will be paid a small but fair stipend in silver pennies. You leave the library with the Laird's awkward, formal thanks echoing in the stone hallway, your head spinning with the sheer strangeness of it all. Elspeth, the village healer, are now in the employ of the reclusive Laird as a literary consultant. The idea is so absurd you almost laugh on the path back to your cottage. The next day, you arrive at the appointed hour, a small bundle of dried herbs for a poultice tucked into your belt out of sheer habit. You feel as though you are crossing a border into a foreign land. The library is just as cold and dusty as it was yesterday, but Alistair has made an attempt at order. The great herball is open on the table, a clean sheet of vellum placed beside it. He has a new quill, its feather neatly trimmed, and a pot of fresh, black ink. He is a man preparing for a battle of words. "I thought we could begin with the first entry," he says, his voice a little too loud in the cavernous silence. He points a finger at a drawing of a plant with heart-shaped leaves and a cluster of bell-like purple flowers. Beside it, his great-grandfather has scrawled foxglove, or as the old folk call it, dead man's bells. "Yes, digitalis purpurea," Alistair says, a note of satisfaction in his voice. Pliny the Elder writes of its use as a powerful purgative. You look at him, your eyebrows raising slightly. Pliny the Elder likely never had to treat old Angus Mackay's heart flutter, you state, your tone flat. You use it for that, to steady a heart that beats like a frightened rabbit. But you use only 2 leaves from a second-year plant, no more, and you pick them before the sun is high. Any more than that, and you're not a healer, you're a murderer. Alistair stares at you. This information is not in any of his books. His knowledge is theoretical, a collection of ancient, revered texts. Yours is a living, breathing thing, a set of rules written in the ink of experience, with life and death as the potential outcome of a single mistake. He makes a note on his sheet of vellum, the scratch of his quill the only sound in the room. The afternoon continues in this fashion. It is a slow, halting dance between his world and yours. He points to an illustration of a lungwort, a plant with spotted leaves that, to some, resemble a diseased lung. An excellent example of the doctrine of signatures, he says, warming to his topic. A mainstream historical fact is that this belief that a plant's appearance reveals its medicinal purpose was a cornerstone of Western herbalism for centuries. In his wisdom, has given us clues, you see, the form indicates the function. You cannot help but snort, a small, unladylike sound of derision. God also gave us fool's parsley, which looks almost exactly like real parsley but will kill a man before he's finished his soup. I'd rather trust my nose than a signature. You point to a different entry, a plant with a bright yellow, star-shaped flower. Take this, celandine. Its yellow sap is good for jaundice, which turns the skin yellow, a perfect signature, but it's also good for warts. And I've yet to see a wart that looks like a yellow flower. His jaw tightens. You are questioning not just his knowledge, but the entire foundation upon which it is built. This is the central conflict, the point where your 2 worlds collide. Historians still argue whether medieval healers operated through a process of trial and error, creating a body of empirical evidence, or if they were simply custodians of ancient and questioned traditions. Your session with the Laird is a living demonstration of that very debate. You represent the former, he the latter. He turns a page, his frustration palpable. "And what of this?" he asks, pointing to a crude drawing of a vaguely man-shaped fruit, mandrake. "My ancestor notes that it must be harvested by a dog, lest the harvester be driven mad by its scream." This quirky tidbit is one of the most famous pieces of plant folklore, repeated in herbals across Europe. Surely you don't believe such superstition? "I believe," you say slowly, choosing your words with care, "that mandrake is a powerful, dangerous plant. And that a story about a screaming root is a very effective way to make sure only the most careful and knowledgeable people ever dare to harvest it. A superstition can be a form of safety." He has no answer to that. He is a man of letters and logic. You are a woman of stories and results. For a moment, a tense, angry silence descends between you. You have reached an impasse. He thinks you a peasant, steeped in ignorance. You think him a fool, blinded by his books. He sighs and points to a drawing that is little more than a smudge of ink, a chaotic squiggle. "This one, I cannot identify it at all. I've cross-referenced every major text. There is no known plant that matches this description." You lean closer. You look at the squiggle, and at the nearly illegible note beside it that mentions the taste of salt and the turning of the tide. You know it instantly. "That's not a plant," you say. "It's sea lace, a seaweed." You find it on the rocks at low tide. You dry it and grind it to a powder. It's for goiter, the swelling in the neck. Alistair looks from the smudge to your face, his expression one of pure, unadulterated astonishment. You have just identified a plant that stumped his entire classical education in less than 5 seconds. The first, tiny crack appears in the wall of his academic certainty. He picks up his quill and, in a quiet, humbled voice, asks, Silace, could you spell that for me? The afternoon following your identification of the Silace marks a subtle but profound shift in the climate of the library. The air is still cold, but the frost that had existed between you and the Laird has begun to thaw. He no longer treats you like a walking, talking footnote to his superior texts. He treats you like a key. You are the one who can unlock the secrets of this chaotic, beautiful book, and a newfound, almost reverent respect has entered his demeanor. He has cleared a larger space on the table, and when you arrive, a small wooden stool is waiting for you, a silent invitation to be a collaborator, not just a consultant. Your days fall into a quiet, focused rhythm. The 2 hours you spend in the library become a strange, suspended period of time, separate from the rest of your life. It is a world of rustling pages, the scratch of a quill, and the low murmur of your voices entangling the thoughts of a man dead for a century. The primary challenge is not the plans themselves, you know them as well as you know the faces of the village children, but the handwriting. Alastair the Quiet may have been a keen observer of nature, but his penmanship was an atrocity. His script is a cramped, spidery scrawl that leans aggressively to the right, as if fleeing from the beginning of the sentence. The letters are inconsistent, the spacing is non-existent, and the ink has faded in places to the color of a weak tea. It's like trying to read the footprints of a spider that drank too much ink and staggered home, you mutter on the third afternoon, squinting at a particularly dense block of text. To your surprise, Alastair lets out a short, sharp puff of air that is almost a laugh. An astute observation, he says, the ghost of a smile on his lips. My Latin tutors had similar words for my own youthful script. You begin to work as a team. He will point to a drawing, and you will name it, in Gaelic, in common Scots, and with a description of where it grows. He writes this down in his neat, precise hand. Together, you tackle the ancestors' notes. It is like a puzzle. You begin to recognize certain patterns in the chaos. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval scribes, to save time and expense of vellum, used a complex system of abbreviations and symbols known as tituli. While his great-grandfather was no professional scribe, he developed his own idiosyncratic shorthand. You are the one who realizes that a small, looped cross doesn't mean blessed, as Alastair assumed, but is instead a symbol for a handful. He had, for 2 days, been transcribing recipes that called for a blessed amount of yarrow. The herbal begins to yield its secrets, and they are not just botanical. Mixed in with the practical advice or scraps of folklore, remedies that verge on the magical, and personal, often grumpy, asides. You decipher a long passage on the rowan tree. Alastair knows it as Sorbaso caprio, a tree of the rose family. You know it as a protector. The old Laird's notes confirm this, detailing how a sprig over the door will ward off evil spirits. But then you find the quirky tidbit, a sprig of rowan placed in the butter churn. You read aloud slowly, ensures the butter comes sweet, and the cow does not get melancholic humors. Melancholic humors in a cow, Alastair mutters, his quill hovering over the vellum. That is scientifically unsound. You reply, but a happy cow gives better milk. Maybe the charm is for the milkmaid, not the beast. This leads you both down a rabbit hole. Historians still argue whether these folk traditions were simple superstitions or if they contained a kernel of forgotten practical wisdom, perhaps a scent from the rowan branch that repelled insects, or a psychological comfort that led to more careful work. You and the Laird are having that very argument in miniature, a quiet, two-person debate that echoes the questions of scholars a world away. You find an entry for chamomile, which details a recipe for a tea to soothe a restless child. But tucked in the margins, in an even smaller, more cramped script, is another recipe. For a grumpy husband, you decipher, a small tugging at your lips, boil the flowers with a spoonful of honey and a single, shed eyelash from a good-natured dog. You look up at Alastair. His ears have gone slightly pink. For a moment, he looks like the awkward, flustered man you first met. He clears his throat and makes a great show of dipping his quill in the inkpot. Fascinating, if unorthodox, addition to the pharmacopoeia, he says stiffly. You share a look, and for the first time, a genuine and guarded smile passes between you. The wall of his academic reserve and your practical defensiveness crumbles just a little bit more. You are no longer just a Laird and a healer. You are to scholars, to translators, partners in the strange and wonderful project of deciphering Alastair the Quiet's chaotic, beautiful mind. The project, which had begun as a simple translation, slowly deepens into something more collaborative. You and Alastair are not just transcribing, you are creating a new work, a palimpsest of old knowledge and new understanding. He writes the formal botanical names in Latin, you provide the Gaelic and local Scots names, and together you decipher the old Laird's notes, separating the practical from the purely fantastical. The library, once a place of cold and overwhelming chaos, is now a focused, quiet space, warmed by the energy of your shared purpose. One gray, drizzly afternoon, while a peat fire Alistair has awkwardly managed to build crackles and spits in the enormous hearth. You come to a section of the herbal that is entirely devoted to the most humble of plants, mosses. His great-grandfather, it seems, had a particular and profound fascination with them. The pages are filled with surprisingly detailed drawings of different varieties, the feathery kind that grows on oak branches, the lush, green cushions that cling to damp stones, the strange, pale wisps that thrive in the boggy parts of the moor. Initially, is dismissive. An entire chapter on moss, he says, flipping through the pages, surely a waste of good paper. They have no flowers, no fruits, no discernible medicinal properties according to any classical text. You run your finger over a drawing of a clump of sphagnum moss, the kind that forms the very peat beneath your feet. No discernible properties, you ask, a challenge in your voice. Alas, ere the quiet knew better than your classical texts. Then, you point to the scrawled notes beside the illustration. With some effort, you decipher the words, the bog moss soaks up water like a thirsty man. Good for a bleeding wound. You look up at him. A warrior's wife, a fisherman's daughter, anyone who has ever had to bind a serious wound in these lands knows this. Before a battle, the women go to the bogs to gather it. It's cleaner than any linen, and it draws the blood and pus away from the flesh. A mainstream historical fact is that sphagnum moss is highly absorbent, capable of holding up to 20 times its weight in liquid. More importantly, due to its acidic nature, it's also naturally antiseptic, inhibiting the growth of bacteria. It was used as a sterile surgical dressing for centuries. Right up until the First World War, Alistair is silent. He stares at the page, then at you, his mind clearly processing this new, revolutionary piece of information. A plant with no roots, no flowers, a thing he had dismissed as little more than green dust, is in fact one of the most powerful healing agents on his lands. It is a profound lesson. The most valuable knowledge is not always found in the grand, leather-bound tomes of famous men. Sometimes it is found in the bogs, in the whispers of women, in the scrawled, near illegible notes of a quiet ancestor. He picks up his quill and begins to write, his neat script filling the vellum with a description of sphagnum's properties, a synthesis of the old laird's words and your own. As he writes, you continue to turn the pages, your shared interest now fully engaged. You find a passage about another type of moss, a dark green, velvety kind that grows on the north side of trees. A quirky tidbit of folklore, according to the old laird, was that if you were lost in the woods, this moss could be a compass, a natural signpost pointing you away from the sun. An interesting navigational theory, Alistair muses, pausing his writing. More than a theory, you reply. My father taught me that, when you're caught in the mists on the high moor, and you can't see the sun or the stars, the moss is the one thing you can trust to show you north. This sparks a quiet, meandering conversation. He asks you about your father, and you find yourself telling him about the quiet, observant man who had taught you how to read the clouds, how to find birds' nests, how to listen to the land. In return, he tells you a little about his own childhood, a lonely affair spent mostly in a monastery school in Perth, where he felt more at home in the scriptorium than in the training yard. Historians still argue about the level of social mobility and interaction between the classes in medieval Scotland. Were the lines between a laird and a village healer so rigid as to be incrossable, or was there room for personal connection in the spaces between their prescribed roles? In the warm, firelit quiet of the library, surrounded by the wisdom of moss, that line between you and Alistair seems to blur, to become as indistinct as the misty view from the high window. You are no longer just a source of information for his project. You are sharing stories. You are to people, a man and a woman, who have spent their lives observing the world in very different ways, and who are now, for the first time, learning to see it through each other's eyes. And it all began with a plant that has no flowers. The mosses, it turns out, were a gateway. Having discovered the profound knowledge hidden in the most humble of plants, Alistair is now consumed by the herbal with renewed, almost feverish intensity. He is no longer just a passive transcriber, he is an active investigator, a detective trying to solve the botanical mysteries of his own lands. The library is no longer a tomb, it is a campaign room, and the book is his map. The problem is, the map is incomplete. The mystery presents itself on a page dedicated to alpine flowers, the small, tough jewels that grow only in the highest, most exposed places. The old laird's drawing is particularly vague, a cluster of 5-petaled, cup-shaped flowers, colored with a faded purple pigment. The scrawl beside it is a mixture of Latin and Gaelic. Alistair can make out the word saxifrage, indicating a rock-breaking plant, but the local name is one you've never heard. Lubanrug, or the king's herb. The ancestors' notes are more poetic than useful. Grows only where the sky kisses the stone, you read aloud, and the shadow of the black eagle falls at midday. Its tea brings quiet to a troubled mind and clarity to the eyes. Where the sky kisses the stone, Alistair repeats, his brow furrowed in concentration. That could mean any peak or high crag in the entire estate. And the black eagle. There hasn't been a black eagle seen in these parts for 50 years. He gets up and retrieves a rolled up piece of vellum from one of the chests. It is a map of the Blackwood lands. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval maps were often wildly inaccurate, more pictorial representations than precise geographical tools. This one is no exception. The coastline is a wobbly, uncertain line, and the hills are drawn as a series of identical, cartoonish lumps, with little regard for scale or position. A spot is labeled Big Hill. Another is simply rocks. It is, for navigational purposes, completely useless. This is hopeless, he says, throwing the map down on the table in frustration. The description is too vague. We'll never be able to identify it for certain without a specimen. He looks at the drawing, then at you, and a slow, dawning realization appears on his face. He is a man of books, and the book has failed him. The answer is not in this room. It is out there, in the wind and the rain, on some forgotten, heather-choked slope. And he has absolutely no idea how to find it. He says, the word both a statement and a question. You would know these places, the high crags, the places where a plant like this might grow. It is a profound role reversal. In this library, he is the laird, the master of the domain. But out there on the moors, the tables are turned. You are the expert. He would be the student, the novice. You hesitate. The moors are your private place, your sanctuary. The idea of leading the awkward, bookish laird through them feels like a strange intrusion. You are also keenly aware of the village gossip. To be seen wandering the hills alone with the married laird, no matter how scholarly the purpose, would be to set the tongues wagging from here to Inverness. But then you look at the crude drawing of the mysterious flower, the king's herb. Your professional curiosity, the healer's instinct to know, to understand, begins to outweigh your reluctance. To find a plant your own mother did not know, to add a new word to your living library, the opportunity is too tempting to resist. I might have an idea where to look, you say slowly. There's a ridge to the north, near the old pack-horse trail. The rocks there face the sky. It is a long walk. We'll leave in the morning, he says, his decision made. The next day dawns bright and clear, a rare and precious gift in these lands. You arrive at the keep gates dressed for the moor, sturdy leather boots, a thick woolen cloak, and a woven wicker basket on your back containing a water skin, a small loaf of bread, and your sharp little harvesting knife. Alistair is waiting for you. He is, you notice with a flicker of amusement, hilariously unprepared. He is wearing his usual dark, scholarly tunic and a pair of thin-soled indoor shoes that will be shredded by the heather and rocks within the first hour. He is also carrying a ridiculously large, leather-bound book. What is that, you ask, pointing to the tome? It's a copy of Divi Vegetabilibus, he says. I thought it might be useful for cross-referencing. You resist the urge to sigh. The only thing you'll be cross-referencing out there, my lord, is your feet with a peat bog if you wear those shoes. And the book will be of more use as a shield if it rains. Historians debate the practical application of classical texts in medieval life. But you are certain that a heavy Latin manuscript has never been of any use to a man trying to navigate the Scottish lands. He looks down at his shoes, then at your own sturdy boots, and has the good grace to look embarrassed. After a brief delay, during which a pair of more suitable, if ill-fitting, boots are procured from a bemused man-at-arms, you are ready. You lead the way out of the castle gate, leaving the world of stone walls and dusty books behind. Before you, the moor stretches out a vast, rolling sea of purple heather and green bracken, rising towards the bare, grey peaks in the distance. The air is clean and sharp, tasting of salt and wild thyme. Alistair takes a deep breath, like a man emerging from a dungeon into the sun for the first time. He is in your world now. The first hour of the journey is a lesson in the vast difference between reading about a landscape and actually walking through it. For all his newfound and more appropriate footwear moves with the clumsy uncertainty of a man who is accustomed to flat, even floors. The moor is a treacherous carpet of hidden holes, slippery rocks, and dense clumps of heather that seem designed to snag the ankles of Dinwary. He stumbles twice, catching himself with a flail of his arms that is deeply dignified for a laird. You move ahead of him with a steady, practiced gait, your feet knowing instinctively where to find purchase, your eyes scanning the terrain ahead. You do not speak much. The wind and the sheer scale of the landscape seem to swallow words. The only sounds are the cry of a distant crow, a long, lonely, bubbling call that echoes across the hills, and the whisper of the wind through the weary grasses. The air smells of damp earth, the sweet, honey-like scent of the heather, and a faint, sharp tang of salt carried from the sea. You point out things to him as you walk a hawk hovering on an updraft, the bright green of new sphagnum moss in a boggy patch, the faint, half-overgrown track of an old peat cutter's road. He listens with a focused intensity, absorbing the information with the same scholarly concentration he gives to his books. He is learning a new text, one written in stone and wind and living things. The clear sky, however, was a deception. It was a pretty light told by a fickle and untrustworthy sky. You notice the change first as a subtle shift in the quality of the light. The sun, which had been bright and sharp, turns hazy and watery. The wind, which had been a steady breeze, begins to gust, carrying a sudden, surprising chill. You look to the west, towards the sea, and see a dark, bruised purple wall of cloud advancing with a natural speed. We need to find shelter, you say, your voice flat and urgent, now. Alistair looks up, his face a mask of confusion. But it was just, he begins, but the first drops of rain, fat and cold as pellets of ice, cut him off. Within minutes, the drizzle becomes a downpour, a torrential, wind-driven sheet of water that plasters your cloak to your back and turns the moor into a sodden, treacherous sponge. The world dissolves into a gray, roaring chaos. Panic flickers in Alastair's eyes. He is soaked to the skin in seconds, his dark hair plastered to his forehead. He is a man of books, a creature of indoor spaces, and he is utterly unprepared for the raw and tame violence of the weather. However, have lived your whole life under this sky, you know its moods, its sudden rages. Your mind is already working, scanning the landscape not for rare flowers, but for the one thing that matters now, survival. This way, you shout over the roar of the wind, there's a bothy, a shepherd's hut, just over this rise. You grab his hand, a gesture of pure, practical necessity that would have been unthinkable an hour ago, and pull him along. You half scramble, half slide down a boggy slope and up the other side. And there it is, tucked into the lee of a rocky outcrop, so low and gray it seems almost a part of the land itself. A bothy. A mainstream historical fact is that these small, rudimentary stone shelters were built and maintained by shepherds for centuries, providing essential refuge for men caught out on the high pastures in sudden storms. They were a lifeline, a shared and vital piece of communal architecture. The one you run to is ancient. Its walls are made of rough and mortared stone, and its roof is thick, living turf, now dark and sodden with rain. There is no door, just a low, dark opening. You duck inside, pulling Alistair in after you. The sudden transition from the roaring chaos outside to the deep, muffled quiet within is staggering. The sound of the storm is muted to a dull, constant roar, like the sea. The inside of the bothy is tiny, no bigger than a large cupboard, and smells of damp earth, old smoke, and wood sheet. You are huddled together in the gloom, water dripping from your cloaks, your breath misting in the cold air. The forced proximity is intense. You are closer to him now than you were during that first, awkward consultation over his splinter. He is shivering, a fine tremor running through his frame. You see a small pile of dried peat and a few sticks left by the last shepherd in a dry corner. With a bit of flint and steel from a pouch at your belt, and the practiced skill of someone who does this every day, you manage to coax a tiny, sputtering flame to life. It gives off more smoke than heat, but it is a spark of warmth, a pinprick of light in the dark, wet world. I am a fool, he says, his voice quiet, his teeth chattering slightly. I should have listened to you about the book. And the shoes. The sky is the only book that matters out here, you reply, your voice equally soft. And it's a difficult one to read. You sit in silence for a long time, watching the small, smoky fire, listening to the storm rage outside. The shared vulnerability of the moment seems to have stripped away the last layers of laird and healer, leaving only two people, a man and a woman, taking shelter from the rain. The small fire is a fragile, living thing in the heart of the stone bothy. It licks at the dry peat, casting a warm, flickering orange glow that pushes back the damp, gray gloom. The smoke, thick with the earthy scent of the burning turf, stings your eyes but also brings a welcome, if meager, warmth. The roar of the storm outside has settled into a steady, percussive drumming on the turf roof, a constant reminder of the wildness you have temporarily escaped. The world has shrunk to the size of this tiny, ancient hut. Alistair has stopped shivering. He is huddled on the packed turf floor, his arms wrapped around his knees, his gaze fixed on the flames. The Laird of Blackwood Keep, the master of 1,000 acres and 100 fighting men, looks, in this moment, like a lost boy. The ordeal has stripped him of his scholarly composure, leaving behind something more raw and vulnerable. You see him not as a figure of authority, but simply as a man who is cold, wet, and a very long way from his library. To break the heavy silence, you reach into your wicker basket. The loaf of bread is slightly damp on one side, but it is still good. You break it in half and offer a piece to him. He takes it with a quiet murmur of thanks. You eat your own piece slowly. The rough, oaten bread has never tasted better. It is a taste of home, of security, a small act of normalcy in a profoundly abnormal situation. My great-grandfather, Alistair says, his voice quiet, almost a whisper, he must have been in storms like this when he was writing his book. It is not a question, it is a realization, a connection he is making across the chasm of a century. To him, this was not a disaster. It was just a Tuesday. The land gives, and the land takes. You reply, your voice equally soft. He knew that. It's the first lesson the moor teaches you. You fall silent again, but the silence is different now. It is not empty. It is a comfortable, shared space. He is looking at you, his eyes reflecting the firelight. You were not afraid, he says. When the storm came, I was afraid. But you just seemed to know what to do. Fear is a luxury you cannot afford when you are responsible for someone else, you say simply. Thin spoken meaning hangs in the air between you. He is the one who is supposed to be responsible for the welfare of his people, for you. But out here in the real and forgiving world, you were the one who was responsible for him. A mainstream historical fact is that the feudal system was built on a concept of mutual obligation. The common folk owed the lord service and rent, and the lord owed them protection. In this tiny stone hut, that system has been turned completely on its head. As the warmth from the fire begins to seep into your bones, a sense of ease, almost of drowsiness, settles over you. It seems, has the opposite reaction. The near disaster has sparked a strange, creative energy in him. He reaches for the small satchel he was carrying, the one you had assumed was full of more useless books. But he pulls out not a book, but a small, leather-wrapped roll. He undoes it, and inside are not quills and ink, but several sticks of charcoal and a small, tightly bound book of clean, smooth paper. He picks up a piece of charcoal. I cannot find the king's herb today, he says, a faint smile on his lips, but I can at least record what we have seen. And then, with a light, deft touch that surprises you, he begins to draw. You expect the same crude, almost childish scrawls as his great-grandfather. But what emerges on the page is something else entirely. His hand moves with a quick, confident grace. He is not just drawing a plan, he is capturing its essence. He draws the sprig of heather you pointed out, not just the shape of its flowers, but the weary texture of its stem. He draws the hawk you saw, a few sharp, angular lines that perfectly convey its predatory stillness as it hovered in the wind. A quirky tidbit of medieval art is that botanical illustration was often a secondary skill for monks and scribes, a way to decorate the margins of more important religious texts. However, draws with the focused eye of a true artist. He looks up, catching your eye. In the monastery, he explains, a touch of his old shyness returning, the only time I ever felt truly at peace was in the scriptorium. Not writing the words, but illuminating the letters, drawing the ivy and the vines in the margins. You lean closer, watching as he draws, from memory, the feathery fronds of a fern you had passed hours ago. He has a perfect, eidetic memory for the things he has seen, a scholar's eye combined with an artist's hand. You realize that this is his secret talent, the hidden part of him that has no place in the world of a warrior laird or a classical scholar. This is how he sees the world, how he understands it. He translates it not just into words, but into images. And you, who have spent your life looking at the real things, are mesmerized by the beauty and accuracy of his copies. The storm, having thrown its tantrum, eventually exhausts itself. The percussive drumming on the turf roof softens to a gentle patter, and then to a quiet, dripping hush. A pale, watery sunlight begins to filter through the low doorway of the bothy, painting a wash of weak gold across the smoky interior. The world outside is born anew, scrubbed clean and glistening. You emerge from the small, dark hut, blinking in the sudden brightness. The air is sharp and clean, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and wet heather. The moor, which had been a canvas of muted purples and greens, is now vibrant, every color intensified, every droplet of water on every blade of grass catching the light like a tiny jewel. The journey back to the keep is a slow, contemplative affair. You walk in a comfortable silence, the shared experience of the storm having forged a new and unspoken understanding between you. The ground is sodden and small, and prompt streams gurgle and rush down the hillsides, but the world feels peaceful, cleansed. Alistair walks with a new confidence, his eyes no longer just on his feet, but scanning the landscape, really seeing it for the first time. He stops to look at a cluster of tiny, scarlet-capped fungi, pointing them out to you not with a question, but with the shared interest of a fellow observer. You arrive back at the castle gates just as the sun is beginning to dip towards the horizon, painting the western clouds in shades of rose and apricot. You are both soaked, muddy, and exhausted, but you are also, in a strange way, invigorated. You are about to part ways at the entrance to the great hall, to retreat back into your separate worlds, when the sound of an approaching horse, ridden hard, makes you both turn. A rider is galloping up the causeway, a large, bull-chested man on a horse to match. He is dressed not for the moor, but for war, with a glint of chainmail under his heavy wool cloak and the hilt of a large broadsword slapping against his thigh. He hauls the horse to a stop, dismounting with a jangling thud. This is Lachlan MacLeod, Alastair's cousin and the laird of the neighboring, and perpetually belligerent, Clan MacLeod. He is everything Alastair is not: loud, forward-faced, with a booming laugh and a beard that looks like it has had unfortunate encounters with his dinner. Cousin, Lachlan roars, slapping Alastair on the back with a force that makes him stagger. I heard you were still alive. Thought you might have shriveled up and turned to dust in that library of yours by now. His eyes fall on you, taking in your muddy boots and damp cloak, and a slow, leering grin spreads across his face. And what's this? Found yourself a little moorhen to keep you warm, have you? You feel a hot flush of anger and embarrassment. You are used to being overlooked, to being the quiet healer on the edge of the village. You are not used to being looked at like that, like a piece of property, a conquest. To your surprise, does not flinch or retreat into his usual shell of awkwardness. He straightens up, a cold, quiet dignity settling over him. Elspeth is a learned woman, he says, his voice steady and clear, lacking its usual hesitation. She is assisting me with a scholarly project of some importance. Lachlan throws his head back and laughs, a great, braying sound that echoes off the stone walls. Scholarly project, is that what they're calling it these days? Gods, man, you are your father's sons. Something. While you're in here playing with weeds and ink, I've been raiding the cattle from the McDonald's. Proper laird's work. He winks at you. A woman needs a man who can protect her and provide for her, not one who can read to her. A mainstream historical fact is that this tension between the martial and scholarly ideals of nobility was a constant theme in medieval society. The need for a laird to be a fierce, effective military leader often clashed with the Christian ideal of a wise, just, and educated ruler. Lachlan and Alastair are the living embodiments of this conflict. You feel a surge of protectiveness for Alastair, an emotion that is as surprising as it is fierce. You have seen a side of him that this oafish warrior could never comprehend. You have seen his quiet intelligence, his hidden artistic talent, his courage in admitting his fear. You have shared a loaf of bread with him in a storm. Lachlan sees weakness. You see a different kind of strength. I was just leaving, my lord, you say, giving a small, stiff curtsy to Alastair, pointedly ignoring his cousin. Wait, Alastair says, his eyes still locked on Lachlan. He gestures towards the great hall. My cousin has ridden far. We must offer him hospitality. He will want to see the progress of my project. There is a new, steely glint in his eye. The scholar has been challenged on his own ground, and he is not backing down. The quiet library is about to become a battlefield. The library, your quiet world of collaborative discovery, is instantly violated by Lachlan's presence. He stalks into the room like a wolf entering a sheepfold, his muddy boots leaving clumps of dirt on the stone floor. He brings the smell of wet horse and aggression with him, a scent that is utterly alien in this space of old paper and dust. He stops in the middle of the room, his hands on his hips, and surveys the scene with an expression of profound, theatrical disbelief. By the saints, he scoffs, gesturing at the great herball on the table, the neat stacks of vellum, and the pots of ink. It's true, you've turned the heart of Blackwood Keep into a monk's craft room. He picks up one of Alastair's new drawings, the delicate sketch of the fern you saw on the moor. Pretty little leaves, will you be sewing this onto a pillow next? Alastair does not rise to the bait. He stands by the table, a quiet, immovable object in the face of his cousin's blustering force. This book is a record of the wealth of our lands, Lachlan, he says, his voice calm and measured. A different kind of wealth than the kind you can herd into a pen. Wealth, Lachlan laughs, a short, ugly bark. It's a list of weeds. I saw the girl here carrying a basket of them. Our people are farmers, and fishermen, and fighters. They need a laird who can lead a charge, not one who can tell the difference between a thistle and a dock leaf. He turns to you, his eyes narrowed. Can your pretty leaves feed a family in winter? Can they hold a pass against the McDonald's? Before you can answer, Alastair does. Some of them can, he says, his voice cutting through Lachlan's scorn. He points to a page in the old herball. This one, which you would call a weed, is scurvy grass. It grows on the cliffs. Even in the winter, it stops a man's teeth from falling out. This one here is willow bark, ground to a powder. It can ease the fever of a wounded man so he has the strength to fight another day. And this one, he adds, his gaze becoming hard, is nightshade. Its berries look sweet. But 3 of them, dropped into a rival's wine, is a quieter way to win a feud than losing 10 good men in a bloody skirmish. Lachlan is momentarily silenced. He is a man of the sword, of direct, brutal force. The idea of this quiet, hidden power, the knowledge of life and death contained in a simple plan, is a concept his mind is not equipped to handle. Historians still debate the primary drivers of these interclan rivalries. Were they pragmatic disputes over resources? Or were they deeply personal conflicts rooted in concepts of honor and competing visions of leadership? The tension between the two cousins is a perfect illustration of this debate. The warrior versus the strategist. The sword versus the poison. Tricks and women's knowledge. Lachlan spits, recovering his bluster, though some of the force has gone out of it. He is on unfamiliar ground here, and he knows it. He came for a fight of swords or fists, and Alistair has offered him a battle of wits. It is a battle he cannot win. A mainstream historical fact is the sacred, and legally enforced, duty of hospitality in the Highlands. Even a bitter rival once under your roof was owed food, drink, and protection. Lachlan is Alastair's guest, and this prevents the conflict from escalating into outright violence. I have business to the south, he says gruffly. I merely stopped to see that our clan was not being led by a ghost. He stalks towards the door, then pauses, turning back. Stay with your weeds, cousin, but when the real wolves come, do not expect your pretty drawings to protect you. With that parting shot, he is gone, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving a profound and ringing silence in his wake. The energy drains from the room as if a plug has been pulled. Alistair stands very still for a long moment, his shoulders, which had been squared in defiance, slumping slightly. The confrontation, though he won it, has taken its toll. The scholar is not built for such open aggression. You move, your actions guided by an instinct as old as healing itself. You go to the hearth, where the peat fire still smolders. From a small pouch at your belt, you take a pinch of dried, fragrant leaves. Lemon balm. A quirky tidbit of herbal lore held that lemon balm, or sweet melissa, could mend a broken heart and drive away sorrow. You know it simply as a soother of troubled nerves. You take a small pot, fill it with water from a ewer on a side table, and set it on the embers to warm. Alistair watches you, his expression unreadable. You work in silence, your movements economical and short. When the water is warm, you add the leaves, and a sweet, citrus-like scent fills the air, a clean, calming fragrance that begins to banish the lingering taint of Lachlan's aggressive presence. You pour the pale, greenish tea into two rough earthenware cups and hand one to him. He takes it, his cold fingers brushing yours. You both sit on the stone bench by the hearth, the great herbal forgotten on the table. You sip the warm, soothing liquid. No words are exchanged, none are necessary. He had stood up for you, for the quiet, important work you were doing together. And now, you are tending to the invisible wound the encounter has left on his spirit. It is an act of quiet loyalty, a moment of shared, peaceful understanding, more profound than any spoken promise. In the days following Lachlan's disruptive visit, a new and deeper quiet settles into your work. The confrontation, ugly as it was, seems to have solidified your partnership. You are no longer just a laird and his hired expert. You are allies, protectors of a shared and precious secret. Having faced down his belligerent cousin, seems to carry himself with a new, quiet confidence. The hours in the library become the calm, steady center of your days, or refuge from the demands of the village and the pressures of his lordship. You are nearing the end of the manuscript. The final section, according to the old Laird's Spidery Index, is dedicated to plants of peril and malice. This is your domain, the knowledge a healer must hold most closely, the delicate line between a cure and a poison often being nothing more than a single grain's weight. You handle these pages with a particular reverence and caution. You work through the entries, the familiar, deadly beauty of foxglove, the pale, ghostly white of hemlock, the seductive, dark gleam of nightshade berries. The old Laird's notes here are less folkloric and more starkly practical, often accompanied by drawings of skulls or crossbones. He details the effects of each poison with a chilling, detached clarity, the way hemlock slowly paralyses a man from the feet up, leaving his mind clear to the very end. The violent, agonizing stomach cramps caused by wolfsbane. A mainstream historical fact is that knowledge of poisons was a double-edged sword. While essential for a physician, it also made one an object of suspicion. Healers and apothecaries were often the first to be accused in cases of suspected poisoning, their expert knowledge becoming evidence against them. You turn a thick, stiff page, expecting to find the entry for monkshood, also known as wolfsbane, one of the most virulent poisons known. But the page is not there. You are staring at the next entry. For hellebore, you flip back. The page before is for nightshade. You check the old Laird's own spidery page numbering in the corner. A page is unmistakably, undeniably missing. What is it? Alistair asks, noticing the sudden stillness of your posture. The entry for wolfsbane, you say, your voice low. It's gone. The entire page has been torn out. A cold, prickling unease begins to creep into the quiet atmosphere of the library. This is not a simple case of a fragile page crumbling with age. You both examine the book's spine. The page has been deliberately and carefully cut out, most likely with a sharp blade, leaving a narrow, telltale stub of paper deep in the binding. At some point in the last century, wanted the knowledge of this specific plant, how to identify it, how to prepare it, and what its effects were, and they wanted it badly enough to mutilate this book to get it. Alastair's face is pale. The scholarly project has suddenly taken on a sinister, chilling new dimension. The herbal is not just a record of the land's wealth, it is also an arsenal, a book of secrets that, in the wrong hands, could be a book of murder. Who would do such a thing? He whispers, more to himself than to you. You both begin a frantic, meticulous search. You comb through every page of the herbal, looking for any other signs of tampering. You check the loose scrolls and charters on the tables in the faint hope that the page was removed and simply misplaced. Nothing. The library, which had become a sanctuary, now feels menacing, its shadows filled with the ghosts of old secrets and forgotten crimes. A quirky tidbit of medieval bookmaking is that due to the expense of vellum and paper, pages were rarely left blank. Any available space was often filled with unrelated notes, doodles, or pen trials where a scribe would test a newly cut quill. This means the missing page was likely filled, edge to edge, with the old laird's distinctive, spidery script, making it a unique and identifiable object. When was the last time anyone seriously used this library? Before you ask, your mind racing. My grandfather, perhaps, Alistair says, raking a hand through his already messy hair. He was a litigious man, always in disputes over land. He spent a great deal of time in here with his clerks, poring over old charters. My father and brother, they barely set foot in this room. The page was likely removed during his grandfather's time, or even earlier, a generation or two ago. An old, cold crime, but a deeply unsettling one. Who needed the secret of a poison so badly? Was it for a rival, a troublesome heir, an unfaithful spouse? The quiet, dusty room is suddenly thick with unspoken, violent possibilities. Historians still argue about the prevalence of poisoning as a political or personal tool in this era. While notoriously difficult to prove, contemporary accounts and court records suggest it was a constant, whispered fear. The missing page in your hands feels like a tangible piece of that fear. The search becomes hopeless. The page is gone. It could be anywhere. It could have been used to administer a fatal dose and then burned to destroy the evidence. The project, which had felt so pure and collaborative, is now tainted by this discovery. The knowledge you are unearthing is not just about healing and folklore, it is also about power, malice, and the dark, secret history of the very keep in which you stand. The mystery of the missing page casts a long shadow over your work. The final entries in the herball, which should have been a triumphant conclusion to your project, feel anticlimactic and tinged with a faint, underlying dread. Every time you enter the library, your eyes scan the room, half expecting to see the lost page lying innocently on a table. The silence of the room, once a comfort, now feels heavy with unspoken questions. Alistair is equally distracted. He stares into the fire for long periods, his mind clearly turning over the grim possibilities. Who in his family history was a poisoner? The thought hangs, unspoken, between you. The transcription work is finished. The old laird's chaotic masterpiece has been tamed, its knowledge transferred to neat, orderly pages of new vellum, illustrated with Alistair's beautiful, precise drawings. It is a magnificent achievement, a fusion of your two worlds. But the empty space where the wolfsbane entry should be is a wound in the heart of the book. Without it, the work feels incomplete, and more importantly, dangerous. The herball is a book of cures, but the missing page is a reminder that the land's power can be turned to much darker purposes. A few days after the final entry is copied, Alistair is engaged in a task he truly despises, sorting through his grandfather's legal papers. The old laird, the litigious one, had left behind a mountain of charters, contracts, and angry letters related to a boundary dispute that had raged for 20 years with a now defunct neighboring clan. It is a monument to stubbornness, written in the dense, impenetrable jargon of medieval law. Alistair sees it as his duty as laird to understand these old conflicts, but the work is tedious, soul-destroying, and a far cry from the vibrant, living knowledge of the herbal. You are in the library, grinding herbs for a teething infant in the village, the familiar, rhythmic work a comfort in the uneasy atmosphere of the keep. Alistair is hunched over a large, leather-bound volume titled On Feudal Tenures and Obligations, a book so mind-numbingly dull it could be used as a sedative. He grunts in frustration, flipping through the dense, Latin-filled pages. It is astonishing, he mutters. How many words can be used to say absolutely nothing of consequence? He turns a page, and then another, and then he stops. A strange, utter stillness comes over him. He says, his voice a tight, quiet thread of sound. You look up from your mortar. He is staring, utterly transfixed, at the open book before him. He slowly, carefully, lifts something from between the pages. It is a single sheet of the thick, rough paper from his great-grandfather's herball, the edges trimmed neatly by a sharp blade. It is covered in the familiar, spidery scrawl. It is the missing page. You abandon your work and rush to the table. There it is. The crude drawing of the dark, hooded flowers of wolfsbane, the detailed, chilling description of its effects, and the notes on how to prepare it, how to turn the beautiful, deadly plant into a poison that leaves almost no trace. It has been here all along, hidden in plain sight, used as a simple bookmark in a book no one had bothered to open for 50 years. A mainstream historical fact is that bookmarks, as we know them, are a relatively modern invention. In the medieval period, readers would use whatever was at hand to mark their place, a piece of string, a scrap of leather, a pressed flower, or in this case, a page torn from another. More interesting book. My grandfather, Alistair whispers, his face a mixture of horror and dawning understanding. He was the one who took it. The litigious laird, the man who fought his battles with contracts and clerks, had armed himself with a darker weapon. The boundary dispute was not just a legal squabble, it had been a conflict serious enough for him to consider. You both look at the page, this small, self-contained testament to a dark intent. A quirky tidbit of legal history is the concept of trial by ordeal, where guilt or innocence was determined by surviving a physical test, like holding a hot iron. These practices were falling out of favor, being replaced by a more document-based legal system. Alistair's grandfather was a man of that new system, a man of paper and ink. It seems he applied that same logic to his darker ambitions, seeking his weapon not in a blacksmith's forge, but in the pages of a book. Historians still argue about the true nature of these long, grinding feudal disputes. Were they cold, calculated power plays, or were they driven by the same hot-blooded passions and hatreds as any battlefield skirmish? The presence of this page, this quietly researched recipe for murder, tucked away in a book about legal obligations, suggests that the two were not so far apart. The cold ink of the law and the hot poison of the wolfsbane were simply different tools for the same job. Alistair reaches out and takes the page. His project is no longer tainted. It is complete. He can now restore the missing entry, making the herball whole again, a complete record of the land's power, for both good and ill. The discovery has not exorcised the ghosts of the past, but it has given them a name and a face. The shadow in the library has been brought into the light. The mystery is solved. With the discovery of the missing page, the last shadow in the library vanishes, replaced by the clear, steady light of understanding. The ghost of Alastair's grandfather, the litigious, secretive man, has been laid to rest. There is no triumph in it, only a quiet, sober sense of resolution. Alistair takes the found page, not with the horror of a man touching a murder weapon, but with the care of a historian restoring a vital piece of a fragmented text. The final act of your long project is one of quiet ceremony. You watch as Alistair prepares a small pot of fish glue, a strong, pungent adhesive used by bookbinders for centuries. A mainstream historical fact is that these glues, made by boiling the skin, bones, and swim bladders of fish, were incredibly strong and flexible, perfect for repairing the spines of well-used books. With the delicate touch of an illuminator, he applies a thin layer of the glue to the narrow stub of paper in the herball's binding and carefully tips the page in. He presses it flat with a block of polished oak, restoring the book to its original, complete form. The wound is healed. The next afternoon, you sit together and perform the final transcription. You read the old Laird's spidery words aloud, the description of the wolfsbane, its deadly properties, the cautions for its use, and Alastair's quill scratches across the new vellum, his hand steady. His purpose clear. He is not just copying a recipe for a poison, he is completing a work of knowledge, honoring his ancestors' commitment to recording the whole truth of the land. Its capacity for healing and its capacity for harm. When the last word is written, a profound and slightly melancholy silence settles over the room. The project is finished. The great herball, reborn in a neat, beautiful new form, lies open on the table, a testament to your months of shared work. Your purpose here is complete. You are once again Elspeth, the village healer, and he is Alistair, the Laird of Blackwood. The bridge that this book built between your two worlds seems to dissolve, leaving you on opposite shores once again. You begin to gather your things, a familiar sense of duty calling you back to your cottage, to the world of poultices and fevers. What will you do now, you ask, your voice soft. I am the Laird, he says, as if reminding himself. I have legal disputes to read, and rents to collect, and a roof that needs thatching. He says the words without enthusiasm, the weariness returning to his shoulders. The vibrant, focused scholar of the past weeks is retreating, the grey, burdened Laird returning to take his place. He closes the new manuscript. It is a beautiful object, the pages clean and white, the script clear, the illustrations vivid and alive. He runs his hand over the new leather cover he has commissioned for it. Then he picks up the quill one last time. There is one final entry to make, he says. He turns not to the last page, but to the very first, the title page. In his elegant, formal script, he has already written the title, a catalogue of all herbs, weeds, and mosses of Blackwood lands. He positions the quill beneath it. You watch, your breath catching in your throat, as he writes. He adds the name of the original author, his great-grandfather. And then, below that, he adds a new line. Revised and completed by Laird Alistair MacLeod and Elspeth of the village, healer of this parish. He looks up at you, his eyes clear and serious. He has not just given you credit. He has bound you to this work, to this keep, to him, with a line of ink. He has made you a co-author, a partner, an equal in the one thing that matters most to him in this world. Historians still argue whether authorship in the medieval period was seen as a solitary act of genius or a more communal, collaborative process. It seems, has firmly chosen his side. A quirky tidbit of scribal culture was the colophon, a note at the end of a manuscript where the scribe would often complain about the work, the cold, or his sore hands. Alastair's final entry is the opposite. It is not a complaint, but a declaration of dependence, an acknowledgement that he could not have done this alone. It is the quietest, most unconventional, and most profoundly romantic proposal you could ever imagine. It is not an offer of a title or of wealth. It is an offer of a shared life's work. A future spent in the quiet, focused, and deeply intimate pursuit of knowledge. A future of collaboration. A future together. You do not need to speak your answer. He sees it in your eyes. You look at your name, written in his hand, and you know, with a certainty that settles deep in your bones, that you are finally, truly, home. And so, as the fire in the great library hearth settles into a warm, glowing bed of embers, our story comes to its gentle end. The long, quiet work is complete, the last page written, the last secret uncovered. Allow the image of that peaceful, book-filled room to fill your mind. Let the sense of completion, of a puzzle finally solved, soothe your own thoughts. The journey is over, and the characters have found their safe harbor, a quiet space built not of stone, but of shared understanding and mutual respect. There are no more storms to weather, no more rivals to face. There is only the promise of many more quiet afternoons, of rustling pages, and of a companionship as steady and resilient as the ancient moss on the stones outside. Let that feeling of quiet contentment settle over you now. Feel the muscles in your body relax, your breathing slow and deepen. The world of the bookish laird and the practical healer fades away, leaving behind only a lingering sense of peace and warmth. There is nothing left to do but to let go, to drift on the soft, slow current of your own breath, deeper and deeper into a calm, quiet, and restorative sleep. The story is finished. Your day is finished. Now is the time for rest.